The United Arab Emirates has become one of the most militarily capable nations in the Middle East. With a population of just 10 million people, this small Gulf federation commands a defense budget exceeding $20 billion annually, operates some of the world's most advanced fighter jets, and maintains a navy equipped with cutting-edge corvettes built to patrol the strategic waters of the Persian Gulf. But what most people don't realize is that behind this military transformation stands not the United States, but France. While America remains the UAE's primary security guarantor, France has quietly positioned itself as the Emirates' most trusted military partner. Through a strategic alliance spanning 3 decades, France has sold the UAE over $40 billion in weapons, established the first foreign military base in the Gulf, and activated a mutual defense agreement that commits French forces to defend Emirati territory. This isn't just about arms sales. This is about France securing its energy interests, projecting power across the Indo-Pacific, and positioning itself as a credible alternative to American dominance in the Middle East. And the UAE is leveraging this partnership to achieve something no other Gulf state has managed: building a truly sovereign defense industry that can produce advanced weapons systems domestically. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how this alliance was built, why it matters more than most people understand, and how it's reshaping the balance of power not just in the Middle East, but across the entire Indo-Pacific region. Because this partnership isn't about the past, it's about the future. And that future is being written right now. To understand this alliance, you need to go back to August 2, 1990. Iraqi forces under Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, seizing the entire country in a matter of hours. For the small Gulf states, this was an existential moment. If Iraq could swallow Kuwait overnight, what would stop them from pushing south into the UAE or Saudi Arabia? The answer came from an unexpected source. Not from their Arab neighbors, but from a US-led coalition that included France. France deployed 18,000 troops to Operation Desert Storm, making it the 3rd largest contributor after the US and UK. French Jaguar fighter bombers flew hundreds of sorties. French armored divisions pushed into Iraq, and critically for the UAE, French Mirage jets operated from Emirati air bases, giving Paris its first operational foothold in the Gulf. The UAE leadership watched this unfold with sharp clarity. Their founding president, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, had built the federation in 1971 with a vision of unity and development. But he'd always understood that small nations needed powerful friends. The Gulf War proved a devastating lesson. Saudi Arabia, the supposed regional heavyweight, had been paralyzed. They couldn't protect Kuwait. They couldn't even protect themselves without American intervention. The other Gulf states were equally helpless. But the Western coalition, led by America and supported by France, had crushed one of the region's largest armies in just 100 hours of ground combat. For the UAE, the conclusion was obvious. They needed to diversify their security partnerships. Relying solely on the United States was a risk they couldn't afford. America's commitment to the region could shift with changing administrations. Political considerations in Washington could delay weapons sales or impose restrictions on their use. France offered something different. As a permanent member of the UN Security Council, as a nuclear power, and as a nation with a long history of independent foreign policy, France could provide the UAE with strategic depth. Emma Soubrier, a researcher at the Arab Gulf States Institute, explained it perfectly when she said that after the Gulf War, the UAE and other small Gulf states realized they couldn't rely on Saudi Arabia for defense, so Abu Dhabi began trying to diversify its partnerships and reinforcing that with France in particular. The partnership didn't start from zero. France had maintained commercial ties with the UAE since the 1970s, particularly through the French oil giant Total Energies, which had significant stakes in Abu Dhabi's oil fields. French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing had even visited the UAE in 1980, meeting with Sheikh Zayed, but those were economic relationships. What emerged in the aftermath of Desert Storm was something far more strategic. On January 18, 1995, French Defense Minister François Léotard flew to Abu Dhabi. Within hours of arriving, he and UAE State Minister for Foreign Affairs Sheikh Hamdan bin Zayed Al Nahyan signed a bilateral defense cooperation agreement. The official statement was diplomatic and vague, talking about close ties and cooperation in the political and military fields. But behind the careful language was something extraordinary. This wasn't a standard arms sales agreement. This was a mutual defense pact. The core of the 1995 agreement, which was renewed and strengthened in 2009, reportedly includes provisions that allow France to use any military means to support the UAE, including nuclear deterrence. Let me be clear about what that means. France was effectively extending its nuclear umbrella to cover the UAE. If the Emirates faced an existential threat, France could theoretically use nuclear weapons to defend them. This has never been officially confirmed by either government, but multiple defense analysts have noted this interpretation of the agreement. Why would France make such a commitment? 3 reasons. First, energy security. The UAE sits on some of the world's largest oil and gas reserves. Total Energies had deep investments in the Emirates. Protecting those investments meant protecting the UAE itself. Second, strategic positioning. A defense agreement with the UAE gave France a permanent foothold in the Gulf, right at the Strait of Hormuz, through which 21% of the world's petroleum passes. Third, arms sales. The UAE was entering a period of massive military expansion, and France wanted to be the primary beneficiary. But for the UAE, the calculation was equally clear. They were getting something from France that America would never provide: unconditional commitment. U.S. defense agreements came with congressional oversight, human rights conditions, and political constraints. The French agreement had none of that. It was transactional, reliable, and discreet. As Jean-Loup Saman, a senior research fellow at the Middle East Institute, noted, if we make a comparison with insurance, the U.S. is the main life insurance, and France is a complementary one. The 1995 agreement opened the floodgates for French military equipment. In the years that followed, the UAE began purchasing French weapons systems at an accelerating pace. Mirage fighter jets, Leclerc main battle tanks, Caesar self-propelled howitzers, attack helicopters, and air defense systems. By the mid-2000s, France had become the UAE's second-largest arms supplier after the United States. In January 2008, French President Nicolas Sarkozy visited the UAE. The trip was historic for multiple reasons. Sarkozy and Emirati leadership signed agreements covering not just defense but nuclear cooperation. France agreed to help the UAE develop civilian nuclear energy, a program that would eventually lead to the Barakah nuclear power plant, now operational as the first nuclear facility in the Arab world. But the defense component was the real strategic shift. During that visit, France and the UAE finalized plans to establish a permanent French military base in Abu Dhabi, not a joint base, not a temporary deployment. A permanent French base on Emirati soil, financed by the UAE but operated by France. The base, known as Camp de la Paix, or the French Forces in the United Arab Emirates, officially opened on May 26, 2009. President Sarkozy and Crown Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan attended the inauguration together. This was France's first permanent military base established outside Africa in 50 years. It was the first French base in the Middle East, and strategically it was positioned to face the Strait of Hormuz. The base consists of 3 separate facilities. First, a naval base at Mina Zayed port on the Persian Gulf side, with a 300-meter wharf capable of accommodating French aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines. Second, a port facility at Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, strategically positioned outside the Strait of Hormuz in case the strait is ever closed. Third, an army base at Zayed Military City, including a training center for urban and desert combat operations that houses the 5th Cuirassier Regiment. And then there's Al Dhafra Air Base. This facility hosts not just U.S. forces, but also French Air Force assets, including Rafale fighters from the 1-7 Provence Squadron. These jets are permanently stationed there, ready to conduct operations across the region. In 2025, France announced it would strengthen this presence even further, deploying an additional infantry company of approximately 100 soldiers to the ground component. The financial arrangement was telling. The UAE paid for all infrastructure construction. France covers operational costs and equipment. This model gave the UAE strategic protection without France having to bear the full cost burden, and it gave France power projection capabilities across the Indo-Pacific region. Because the Joint Commander of the French forces stationed in the UAE also serves as Joint Commander for French forces in the Indian Ocean, meaning this base in Abu Dhabi commands French military operations from the Suez Canal in the west to Indonesia and Western Australia in the east. But the base is more than a military installation. It's a statement of commitment. When you station 700 troops in another country's capital, when you base your fighter jets and nuclear submarines there, you're not just selling weapons. You're putting your own forces in harm's way to defend that country. That's a level of commitment that transforms a commercial relationship into a true alliance. The real transformation of UAE military power came through the weapons deals that followed, and France was at the center of nearly all of them. In December 2021, during a visit by President Emmanuel Macron to the UAE, the two countries signed the largest French arms export deal in history. The UAE agreed to purchase 80 Rafale F-4 fighter jets for 16 billion euros, approximately $18 billion. Additionally, 12 H-225M Caracal helicopters and a weapons package worth 2 billion euros that included 300 Meteor long-range air-to-air missiles, 600 Mica NG medium and short-range missiles, and Black Shaheen cruise missiles, a variant of the French Scalp cruise missile modified specifically for the UAE. Let me put those numbers in context. At the time of the deal, the UAE already operated 63 Mirage 2000 fighters purchased from France. The addition of 80 Rafale F-4 jets would make the Emirati Air Force one of the most capable in the Middle East, equipped with 4th-generation plus aircraft that can match anything in the region short of 5th-generation stealth fighters like the F-35. And the Rafale F-4 isn't just any fighter. It's the most advanced variant Dassault Aviation produces, equipped with the latest avionics, electronic warfare systems, and sensor fusion technology. The weapons package is equally significant. The Meteor missile has a range exceeding 100 kilometers and is powered by a ramjet engine that maintains high speed throughout flight, giving it one of the largest no-escape zones of any air-to-air missile in the world. The Mica NG is a beyond visual range missile with active radar and infrared variants. And the Black Shaheen cruise missile has a range of 290 to 560 kilometers, allowing the UAE to strike strategic targets deep into hostile territory. But the arms deals go well beyond fighter jets. In November 2017, the UAE selected French shipbuilder Naval Group to construct Gowind-class corvettes for the UAE Navy. The contract, valued at approximately $850 million, covers 2 vessels with options for 2 more. The first corvette was launched in December 2021, delivered in late 2023, with the second arriving in 2024. These are sophisticated warships. The Gowind corvette displaces 2,700 tons, equipped with MBDA Exocet anti-ship missiles, Raytheon-evolved Sea Sparrow surface-to-air missiles, and the SETI's combat management system. Why does this matter? For decades, Gulf navies were essentially Coast Guard forces with a few patrol boats. The Gowind corvettes give the UAE Navy blue water capability, meaning they can operate far from shore, project power across the Persian Gulf and into the Indian Ocean, and defend critical sea lanes and oil infrastructure. The vessels are built with stealth features, advanced radar systems, and can conduct anti-submarine warfare, anti-surface warfare, and air defense operations simultaneously. Then there's the Missile Engineering Centre. In 2023, MBDA, the European missile manufacturer jointly owned by France, the UK, and Italy, opened this facility in Abu Dhabi in partnership with the UAE's Tawazun Council. This isn't just an assembly plant. It's a technology transfer operation designed to give the UAE the capability to produce advanced missile systems domestically. MBDA describes it as the first such facility outside Europe. The UAE is working with French engineers to adapt manufacturing processes, train Emirati technicians, and eventually produce Meteor and Mica missiles locally. This is where the UAE France partnership differs fundamentally from the UAE-US relationship. When America sells weapons to the Gulf states, technology transfer is minimal. Source codes are closely guarded. Maintenance is often performed by US contractors. The F-35 program, for example, won't let foreign operators access critical software. France, by contrast, is willing to share technology, train local workforces, and help the UAE build indigenous defense capabilities. And for a small nation trying to achieve strategic autonomy, that makes all the difference. On January 17, 2022, at approximately 10 a.m., multiple explosions rocked Abu Dhabi. Yemen's Houthi rebels had launched a coordinated drone and missile attack targeting the UAE capital. 3 fuel tankers exploded near Abu Dhabi National Oil Company storage facilities, killing 2 Indian nationals and 1 Pakistani. A separate strike hit a construction site at Abu Dhabi International Airport. The Houthis claimed responsibility, announcing that this was Operation Hurricane of Yemen, launched in retaliation for UAE-backed forces defeating Houthi fighters in southern Yemen. For the UAE, this was a shock. The Emirates had largely avoided direct attacks despite their involvement in the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen since 2015. The Houthis had launched missiles at Saudi Arabia for years, but the UAE, positioned further from Yemen, had been relatively safe. Suddenly, that safety was gone, and the location of the attack made it personal. This wasn't a strike on a remote military base. This was the capital. Abu Dhabi hosts approximately 2,000 American troops at Al Dhafra Air Base. It's where French forces are stationed. It's where international businesses have their regional headquarters. The world watched to see how the UAE's security partners would respond. France didn't wait. Within hours, Paris activated the 1995 defense agreement for the first time in its history. French Defense Minister Florence Parly announced on February 4, 2022, that France would provide military support to protect Emirati airspace, including deploying Rafale fighter jets already stationed at Al Dhafra Air Base to conduct aerial surveillance, detection, and interception missions. France also offered to reinforce the UAE's air defense systems and provide in-flight refueling capabilities. Parly was explicit about the commitment. She tweeted that the UAE had been the victim of serious attacks and that France had decided to provide military support to protect their airspace against any intrusion. Rafale fighters from France's permanent force based in Abu Dhabi would be engaged alongside the UAE armed forces, in surveillance, detection, and interception missions. This wasn't symbolic. French jets began flying combat air patrols over Emirati territory within days. The United States also responded, deploying F-22 Raptor stealth fighters and the guided missile destroyer USS Cole to the region. But America's response took longer. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announced the deployment on February 2nd, 2 weeks after the initial attack. By contrast, France activated its defense agreement within hours and had jets in the air within days. For Emirati officials, this difference mattered. One senior UAE official commented on France's reliability, noting that while France's capabilities were smaller than America's, the speed and commitment of the French response sent a significant international signal. The 2022 Houthi attacks and France's response crystallized what the UAE France alliance really means. It's not just about selling weapons. It's about being willing to put your own forces in harm's way to defend your partner. France demonstrated that when Emirati territory is threatened, French pilots will fly combat missions to defend it. That level of commitment transforms a commercial relationship into a genuine strategic alliance. But the UAE France military alliance isn't just about the Middle East. It's about France, positioning itself as a major player in the Indo-Pacific region. France has overseas territories in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, including Reunion Island and Mayotte in the Indian Ocean, and French Polynesia, New Caledonia, and Wallis and Futuna in the Pacific. These territories make France a resident power in the Indo-Pacific, and Paris has developed an ambitious strategy to protect its interests across this vast region. The UAE sits at a critical junction in this strategy. Located at the western edge of the Indo-Pacific, the Emirates serve as France's forward operating base for projecting power eastward. The French military base in Abu Dhabi is explicitly designed not just to protect the UAE, but to enable rapid force projection across the Indian Ocean. When French forces conduct exercises in the Pacific or respond to crises in the Horn of Africa, they route through Abu Dhabi. In February 2023, France, India, and the UAE formalized a trilateral cooperation initiative. This wasn't a defense pact per se, but it established a framework for cooperation in defense, technology, energy, and climate action across the Indo-Pacific region. The three foreign ministers agreed to work together on maritime security, freedom of navigation, and countering non-traditional threats like piracy and terrorism. In June 2023, the three countries conducted their first joint maritime exercise in the Gulf of Oman. In January 2024, they held their first joint air exercise in the Arabian Sea. Why does this matter? Because France is using its partnership with the UAE to build a network of alliances that connect the Gulf, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific. The French Naval Command for the Indian Ocean is based in Abu Dhabi. French forces in the UAE coordinate with Indian and Emirati militaries. During the Pégase 2024 exercise in July 2024, a French-led combined joint expeditionary force departed from France and the UK, transited through the French base in the UAE, stopped at a support base in Singapore, and arrived in Australia 4 days later. This gives France something unique among European powers: the ability to project military force from the Mediterranean to the South China Sea without relying entirely on U.S. infrastructure. And for the UAE, participating in this Indo-Pacific framework elevates their strategic importance far beyond the Gulf. Abu Dhabi becomes not just a regional player, but a node in a global security network that spans 3 continents. In 2024 and 2025, France has been executing a major strategic reorientation. After decades of maintaining large military presences across West and Central Africa, Paris is dramatically reducing its troop levels on the continent. Between 2022 and 2024, French forces withdrew from Mali, the Central African Republic, Burkina Faso and Niger following coups, anti-French sentiment, and the arrival of Russian Wagner Group mercenaries. In 2025, Armed Forces Minister Sébastien Lecornu announced that France would scale down its forces in Africa from 2,300 personnel to just 600 distributed among Chad, Gabon, Côte d'Ivoire, and Senegal. General Thierry Burkhard, Chief of Defense Staff, defended this adjustment during a Senate hearing, stating that while France's military presence in Africa had proven effective, negative perceptions were undermining its benefits. Where are those forces going? To the UAE. France is bolstering its permanent deployment at its Abu Dhabi base, adding an infantry company of approximately 100 soldiers to the 5th Regiment of Cuirassiers starting in 2025. This regiment includes 16 Leclerc tanks, VBCI-equipped infantry, 5 CASAR artillery systems, and command and logistics squadrons. The message is clear. France is pivoting away from its former African colonies and towards strategic partnerships in the Gulf and Indo-Pacific. This reorientation reflects a fundamental shift in French strategic thinking. For over a century, France's military posture was defined by its colonial legacy in Africa. But that model is collapsing under pressure from anti-French sentiment, Russian and Chinese influence, and political instability. The UAE offers France something different: a stable, wealthy partner that welcomes French presence, finances French military infrastructure, and shares strategic interests in energy security, counter-terrorism, and great power competition with China. The UAE benefits from this shift as well. As France withdraws from Africa, it becomes more focused on the Gulf and Indo-Pacific, meaning the UAE receives more attention, more resources, and more strategic priority from Paris. And as France seeks to establish itself as a credible alternative to US dominance in the region, the UAE gains more leverage in its own relationship with Washington. So, let me break down what the UAE-France military alliance actually represents, because it's more significant than most analysts realize. First, it's about strategic autonomy for both countries. For the UAE, partnering with France reduces dependence on the United States without antagonizing Washington. The Emirates can pursue policies that might frustrate American officials, like engaging with Russia or China, while knowing they have France as a fallback option. For France, the UAE partnership enables independent military operations in the Gulf and Indo-Pacific without requiring US approval or support. Second, it's about technology transfer and indigenous capability. The UAE isn't just buying French weapons, they're learning to produce them. The Missile Engineering Centre in Abu Dhabi, the local assembly of Rafale components, the training of Emirati engineers by French defense companies, all of this is building the UAE's domestic defense industrial base. Within a decade, the UAE could be producing advanced weapons systems and potentially exporting them to other nations, creating a new arms manufacturing hub in the Gulf. Third, it's about energy security and economic interests. France depends on oil and gas imports. The UAE sits on massive reserves. Total Energies has invested billions in Emirati energy projects. Protecting those investments requires protecting the UAE itself. The military alliance ensures that French energy security is directly tied to Emirati territorial integrity. And as Europe tries to reduce dependence on Russian energy, Gulf states like the UAE become even more strategically important. Fourth, it's about great power competition. China is expanding its influence across the Middle East and the Indian Ocean. Russia is pushing into Africa and the Gulf. The United States is increasingly focused on the Pacific and less engaged in the Middle East. France sees an opportunity to position itself as the Western power most committed to the Gulf and Indo-Pacific regions. By deepening its alliance with the UAE, France gains a foothold that neither China nor Russia can easily replicate. Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, It's about the future of Gulf security. For decades, the Gulf Cooperation Council states relied on the United States as their ultimate security guarantor. But that relationship is changing. American domestic politics make military commitments abroad more uncertain. The U.S. pivot to Asia means fewer resources for the Middle East. And Gulf states have learned they can't always count on Washington to approve arms sales or support their regional policies. France offers an alternative. A Western partner that's reliable, technologically advanced, and willing to commit forces to the region without the political constraints that hamstring American policy. The UAE-France alliance represents a model that other Gulf states are watching closely. Saudi Arabia has its own defense relationship with France, though not as deep as the UAE's. Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman are all exploring ways to diversify their security partnerships beyond just relying on America. If the UAE-France model proves successful, it could reshape how small but wealthy nations manage their defense in a multipolar world. Looking forward, this alliance is only going to deepen. The UAE received its first Rafale fighter jets in January 2025, with deliveries continuing through 2031. As those aircraft arrive, the Emirati Air Force will become increasingly interoperable with French forces, conducting joint training exercises and coordinating operational procedures. The naval partnership will expand as the UAE receives its Gowind corvettes and potentially orders the additional 2 vessels under option. The Missile Engineering Centre will begin local production of advanced missiles, reducing the UAE's dependence on imports and creating export opportunities. France will continue to strengthen its military presence in Abu Dhabi, adding personnel and equipment as it scales back operations in Africa. The trilateral framework with India will mature, likely expanding to include more joint exercises, intelligence sharing, and coordinated responses to regional security challenges. And as tensions in the Gulf persist, whether from Iran, Houthi rebels, or other actors, the 1995 defense agreement will remain a critical backstop for Emirati security. There are challenges ahead. Human rights concerns continue to shadow this relationship. Organizations like Human Rights Watch have criticized France for selling weapons to the UAE, given Emirati involvement in conflicts in Yemen and Libya. The European Parliament has questioned whether French arms might be used in ways that violate international humanitarian law. Paris has defended its sales by pointing to the UAE's role as a stabilizing force in the region, but these concerns aren't going away. There's also the question of how the United States views this partnership. On one hand, Washington benefits from having strong European allies engaged in the Gulf. France's presence adds to the overall Western military capability in the region. On the other hand, as the UAE becomes less dependent on America, Abu Dhabi gains more freedom to pursue policies that might not align with U.S. interests. The delicate balance is that France complements rather than replaces the U.S. security role. But that balance could shift if regional dynamics change dramatically. The UAE-France military alliance is a masterclass in strategic partnership building. It started with shared interests emerging from the 1991 Gulf War. It was formalized through the 1995 Defense Agreement. It was cemented with the establishment of a French military base in 2009. It was tested and proved reliable during the 2022 Houthi attacks. And it's now expanding into a broader Indo-Pacific framework that connects 3 continents. For a small nation like the UAE, this alliance provides strategic depth, technological capability, and a credible security partner beyond just the United States. For a medium power like France, it provides energy security, military basing, arms export revenues, and a platform for great power competition in one of the world's most strategic regions. And for the rest of the world, it demonstrates that the old model of Middle East security, centered entirely on American military dominance, is evolving into something more complex. The UAE-France military alliance isn't the biggest story in global security. It doesn't generate headlines like US-China tensions or the war in Ukraine, but it's reshaping the strategic landscape of the Gulf and the Indo-Pacific in ways that will matter for decades. France has secured its position as a credible military power outside Europe. The UAE has achieved a level of military capability and strategic autonomy that few nations of its size possess. And together, they've built something rare in international relations: a genuine strategic partnership between a small, wealthy state and a medium nuclear power, based not on historical ties or shared ideology, but on cold, clear-eyed calculations of mutual interest. That's how alliances are really built, not through grand visions or diplomatic rhetoric, but through shared threats, complementary capabilities, and the willingness to commit real resources to each other's security. The UAE and France have done exactly that, and the result is one of the most consequential military partnerships of the 21st century.